my core medicine really is psilocybin. Recently, I've also been working more with the subtle plants. And I really love, for example, working with cacao, but also different flower essences with rose, for example, and also the lotus. So not only with psychedelics, because I also believe there's so much beauty in working with the different plants that are non-psychedelic. So in that way, I have a more holistic approach to life, where it's not just about having these big experiences, but also connecting to the medicines in the subtle essences. And in the end, it's really about forming this deep, intimate relationship with nature and with ourselves. What has been really big in this book is about me opening up and allowing myself to be supported.
Hi everyone, welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Today we have a returning guest in the house, Sanne. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back. So thank you for welcoming me again on your podcast.
Such a pleasure to have you. As always, you can come as much as you like because we love having these deep dive conversations. So really appreciate your time to be with us. And for our listeners, if this is the first time you are seeing this conversation with Sanne, Sanne is a returning guest. We already had 2 episodes in the past, so we will be adding those in the show notes so you can check them out too. And Sanne is a really good friend of mine, and we've known each other for so long. So she is one of the most transparent facilitators in this space that I feel so comfortable unpacking and sharing and also discussing a lot of the observations in the psychedelic space, which we will go to towards the end of this episode. And today we want to deep dive into Sanne's current journey and what's been happening in her world. But before that, let me share with you a little bit of a background and some context to Sanne and her work, and then we can deep dive. That's okay. So Sanne is an artist, writer, ceremonialist, and mental health coach who lives in Den Haag, that's Netherlands. Her journey with fungi and plant medicines has blossomed into transformative ceremonies and retreats with live music and creative rituals, drawing from a rich tapestry of therapeutic modalities and shamanic wisdom. She guides seekers on an odyssey from the confines of the mind to the expansiveness of the heart. Sanne, tell us a little bit about what brings you to this work so that we can begin there, and then we go on to what's the mission that you're on.
Yeah, so I've been doing work with especially the mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, for about 4 years now, I think even more. And what got me more into this space, I began actually more working with therapeutic modalities and inner child work, and beginning to work with processing emotions and how to resolve trauma. And yeah, I especially fell really in love with inner child work. And then an opportunity opened up for me after being in a psilocybin retreat to also become a facilitator. And then I began facilitating mainly private sessions and assisting at retreat. And now it kind of has grown into also facilitating for small groups, and also at a women's retreat, also with Naz and Rachel. I think they were also on your podcast from Women Are the Medicine. And what has really changed for me over the years is beginning to work more with the creative process, and also more recently with live music. So that has been a very big transition for me, and something I love very much. And I'm still a beginner at playing music, but it's something I love very much, and it feels very natural and beautiful to deepen the work that I do.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we will come back to the inner child work because I'm interested in asking you more questions about that. But before we go there, can we talk about your mission and also your new project, which is a book, Become the Medicine, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Wholeness. Maybe we can start there. Is that kind of intertwined with the mission? Does that kind of bring like sort of the threads of your journey into this one book where you can maybe reach and share it more openly? Is that sort of like the intention behind it? Maybe you can tell us a bit about the book.
Yeah, actually it is. So the book basically is me documenting my journey, and then also weaving in kind of the wisdom I received along the way, and also weaving in some kind of mythological stories to give it more depth, adding in some ancient wisdom. And the beginning of the journey, and we talked, I think, a lot about it in the first episode I did with you, is when I was 18 years old, I had a heart attack and a near-death experience. And it was like a big kind of wake-up call moment for me, opening me up. And that's kind of where my curiosity began for mystical experiences, because I just wanted to understand. And then kind of on my own kind of journey of just kind of seeking, finding answers, wanting to understand, and really committing to my mental, emotional, physical health. And it still really is kind of the number one thing and priority in my life. And everything else becomes second, because I think without our health, like, I just realize how important it is and how we can just so easily take it for granted. So that process opened up, and then along the way I got curious, because when I was listening to different podcasts and things, I kind of learned more about the psychedelic experience, and then even sometimes people share things or how it kind of shifted something in them. And then I was like, oh, that actually reminds me of some things that I've experienced kind of as an effect of the near-death experience. And then later I also found, I think it's one of the most well-known in the earlier studies at Johns Hopkins University with patients, I think, who had like life-threatening forms of cancer. And they did the trial because of, I think, their fear of death. And it caused a lot of anxiety and depression in their lives. And that for them, through their kind of mystical experience induced by psilocybin, they, had very similar experiences where they no longer feared death. And that's what I kind of had through my heart attack, because before that, and I'm going deeper in that in the book as well, is that I actually kind of, in hindsight, I kind of suffered from what we would call like death phobia. So I had this constant fear that I was going to die or I was going to lose someone I loved. And of course, it was kind of because of trauma and different losses that I experienced. And after being confronted with my greatest fear, it no longer had that grip on me, and I was able to live more fully and no longer this constant fear. And it was not like, okay, then everything was over and I no longer had those fears. It's like, it's always kind of, there's this big shift moment, but there's also like this longer process, right? And that's why I go more, and that's what I love about books, because in a book, you're able to go more in that depth, right? Because often we tell a story and then people think, oh, it's just these overnight things, and then someone's life changed and that was it. And what I love about taking people on a journey is that you see these different, there's so many different layers to it. And it's almost like every time we work through these different layers. So yeah, that's kind of where the book begins. And then eventually I kind of have my own meeting with the golden teachers with psilocybin, and had incredibly powerful experiences. And I continue to this day, that relationship has grown and deepened. And on that journey, I also worked with different plant medicines, like ayahuasca, for example, which I also learned a lot from. But I feel like my core medicine really is psilocybin. And recently, I've also been working more with more the subtle plants. And I really love, for example, working with cacao, but also different flower essences, with rose, for example, and also the lotus. And so not only with psychedelics, um, you know, so because I also believe there's so much beauty in working with the different plants and that are non-psychedelic. So in that way, I have a more holistic approach to life, where it's not just about having these big experiences, but also connecting to the medicines in the subtle essences. And in the end, it's really about forming this deep, intimate relationship with nature and with ourselves. And also, what has been really big in this book is about me opening up and allowing myself also to be supported. Because that's, I think, where I got stuck in life and where I still can sometimes regress into is kind of I have to do it all alone mentality, and kind of I'm more introverted, so that's my comfort zone, kind of creatively figuring things out on my own. But I feel like my biggest growth and healing has really also been allowing in support and kind of letting go of these walls or of these, and that's where inner child work comes in for me a lot, is kind of healing those wounds and letting go of these um, layers of protection that are no longer needed. And for me, the inner child also really comes in with creative work. I believe our creativity is accessed through the inner child. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's say, if somebody's listening for the first time and heard the term inner child, what does that mean? What does that mean in the most, practical way? Because, I'm sure some of our listeners are very familiar with it, and there are so many different, terms and concepts and methods and different tools that are people constantly, bringing up the concept of working with our inner child. So how do you do it and how do you understand it?
Yeah. So the first thing is like we have kind of like consciously working with the inner child, like within a therapeutic setting that we do, or within coaching. But the way I see it, we're always in relationship with our inner child because it is us and it's actually the core of us. So the way I often explain it is like what a lot of people know is like these Russian dolls or like Eastern European dolls. They're not only unique to the Russian culture, and it's kind of like these dolls and you kind of take them out and then you have a bigger one. And in that is one that's a little bit smaller, and then it goes smaller, smaller, smaller until you kind of have like at the core is like this little baby. So I would say like that, like as a baby and as an infant, that's kind of as the core of who we are. And then we kind of grow, and kind of what we now see is the outer layer. So the outer layer is kind of our adult self. And often because we see that in the mirror every day, like I'm an adult now, we think we're just the adult, but it's just the outer layer. So when we talk about the inner child, there's kind of two ways of looking at it. So the inner child is kind of as the essence of who we are. So our innocence, our authenticity, like that natural playfulness, that is kind of like the eternal child within us. And then we also have the archetype of the wounded child within us. So the archetype of the wounded child, it feels more like in the heart, it can feel more like these deeper emotions. And whenever so this kind of a term that's used a lot, like trigger. So it's often when there's like a big emotional reaction to something that can feel seemingly small. And then often it comes from the inner child. So there can be this, yeah, it's almost like the eternal child is kind of in a state of oneness, and the wounded child is actually in a state of separation. So it's almost like we have all these different parts and fragments of kind of what is called like more unresolved, as an effect of unresolved traumatic situations in life, which can be like big events or it can be smaller reoccurring events. So yeah, but then often the inner child can, whenever we react in a way that we're like kind of surprised by, or something just takes over us, or like I think for a lot of for most people, our core wound is actually more like an abandonment, feelings of abandonment. That's often really signs of the inner child. That's why it shows up so strongly in relationship dynamics. Yeah, so I think if I would explain it in a simple way, that would be it. And then, of course, there are also meditation and therapeutic processes where we can kind of intentionally reconnect with the inner child to kind of, create space for anything that needs to be voiced by the inner child for it to be voiced, and that you can kind of start a dialogue to kind of create more like integration so that part of you no longer feels separate. But I also want to say is that for some people, then that's a very real visual experience. For other people, they don't really get there. So I just wanted to point that out because sometimes people, they hear all about, like you said, about inner child work, and it's something that's good for you to do when you kind of suffer from depression or anxiety, but then they don't really see their inner child kind of come towards them in an inner process, and they think they're doing something wrong, or inner child work doesn't work for me. But it can be as simple as really just being present and listening to our emotions and our feelings. Yeah, and I just wanted to really say that because I've heard that many times with people who don't always have that
Yeah,
experience.
you mean they feel they cannot connect with their inner child? Is that what they say? They just cannot. They just don't know what that looks like, the process.
Yeah, that can be like for everyone, of course, it's a bit different. Some people say, like, I cannot really see or kind of conceptualize an inner child. Other people's like, I don't know how to connect with it. So for everyone, it's a bit different. For other people, it's just very natural process. It naturally happens. Um, and when people have that, I don't really know how to connect with it. And I just always invite to simply connect with the heart and with the body and the emotion, and to simply process that, because that's kind of what the inner child is holding on to. Like I say, it's naturally part of us. And when we do a process or meditation with more visualizing or creating an inner dialogue, it's just a process to help us to return to that state of integration. But we can also do that in different ways. So then it's more like about like an inner resolution or healing, but a beautiful way to kind of connect with the child is also, like I said, through creativity. And especially for people who haven't been creating for a long time, it can be very simple to just, play with some paint, or to kind of go back in time and like, what is it that I actually enjoyed doing as a child? Maybe it would be something different, because painting, that was a big part for me, but for someone else, maybe something different comes up. And then if there are any feelings kind of in relation to that, of, or even a grief of giving something up that was is actually so important to us, or it can be giving up on a certain dream or something we loved, then it kind of naturally comes up. Or it can just simply be a way of reconnecting to that joy, as, for example, it can also be with dancing and singing. These are these things we naturally do as a child, but we kind of stop at some point. So that's also kind of another example of kind of more an outward way, where we kind of do inner child work. Yeah.
Yeah, just bringing more creative process to it, and giving that a space, giving whatever needs to show up and arise, giving it a space, I guess. Yeah, so I wanted to go back to your experience. I know it's all very interesting that you having a heart attack at the age of 18. And you said something about something that was brewing. Was it something that was brewing about fear of something and then like fear of death? Is that what you said? And then suddenly having the heart attack? It's almost like, there is a saying, like an old saying in our culture, that what you're afraid of will come, like you will face, type of thing. It kind of seems a bit like that. And I was wondering, once you faced that fear, it no longer had the grip over you. I was wondering if your thoughts are similar when it comes to mental health. And, if you look at some of the processes that people are experiencing during their psychedelic sessions or ceremonies, actually, it doesn't matter which medicine. I feel like any medicine can take someone there. So another thing that I wanted to say is that I think there is a lot of conversation around separating the medicines and thinking that, MDMA would be all love and light and allow you to connect and help you feel more compassion while you're going through this trauma experience. But then I speak to so many different people that sometimes with MDMA, they have an experience like an ayahuasca experience. So it's very different. But I think ultimately what I'm hearing and what I'm also speaking to people and what they are sharing about where they had their breakthrough is usually when they face a fear at some level. Would you agree? That's kind of like the turning point to loosen up or loosen the grip a little bit. And then that would be the short impact. And then you would continue then to integrate and your entire life trajectory changes, where the entire life becomes this integration ceremony, for example. Would you agree?
Yeah. So I actually think it's both. I don't believe like always our fears it actually comes true, but sometimes it does. Um, and for me, like a couple years before that, when I was 15, my father had a heart attack, and I think that was one moment. And then a couple years before that, a friend of mine, he committed suicide. So I had all these experiences around death. And even a girl at my school, she got murdered. So there was like back to back these experiences. And I think part of it was I just hadn't processed that. So there was just this anxiety in my body. So it's almost like, like that's the thing with trauma, whenever we link it to something. So it becomes this whole thing that was just holding so much fear. And yeah. So then I also this fear like something would happen to me. So yes, there was this psychological process of fear. And yeah, I think there's so many layers to it. At some point, I even think like from a more witness perspective that it's almost like that needed to happen in my life at that point. And in a way where I mean it is like I was really going off the path. I was not living healthy. I needed something big and strong to wake me up, pretty much. And that's how I see and look at it now. And that's why I sometimes also call it like a blessing in disguise. And coming back to your point about like also connecting it to the psychedelic experience. So first of all, I think from my experience, every medicine is so different. And also every experience is also very different. And then every person experiences it is also different. So like I said, like we can of course generalize it in different teams. For example, with psilocybin, it's very also connected to the inner child, too, because, like I said, also Los Niños Santos, like the little children, how Maria Sabina called it. So that's a strong team for me. It brings me in touch this childlikeness, but I've also had experiences that were incredibly deep and were far more like initiatory, take me really into kind of the depths. Also confronting with like parts of me that, for example, felt very lonely and abandoned and unsupported. So I think there are always so many layers to it. And there is this thing, and I call it like initiatory experiences where we are confronted with our fears. And like I said, it is a blessing in disguise because there is great value in that, but it's not easy. It is very hard. That doesn't always have to be the case. You know, we can also have experiences where it's a lot lighter. There's no resistance. It's almost like going with the flow, and there is not actually as much fear there. But, you know, when we are confronted with their fear, it's like there's no way really around it, but kind of to face it and really move through it. And looking back, I do see for myself and others that those usually are kind of the experiences that change the most in our lives. But I do feel like, and this is my personal experience, it might be not be like that for everyone, but as I kind of, for me, experiences have gotten lighter with time. And even the difficult experiences in life, I can still be confronted with fear, but it's almost like the more we consciously seek these experiences, our relationship with fear changes. Just it's like our relationship with death changes because our relationship with the unknown changes. That doesn't mean like challenging things in life are still challenging, but it's almost like it's we become better and better at navigating it. And especially experienced that earlier this year when my father passed away. He had a heart attack, but for the third time. And then again, I was confronted with my fear because part of me, like a lot of the healing work and everything I did for myself and to give it to others. But there was always a part of me that hoped that it would help my father. And that never came true. So, but it was almost like the moment that happened, it's almost like that fear loosed its grip on me. And even afterward, there was this friend who messaged me kind of from more from high school. And she said, I always knew that was your greatest fear. And now it has come true. And it was, and even the moment when I read that message and it was like, yeah, it's true, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be. And I'm not saying it easy. It was a very challenging and difficult process. And there's still challenges that I'm facing because of it, because it only happened at the beginning of this year. But yeah, I find it difficult to really put it into words. It's almost like, yes, it's difficult and it's challenging, but it's almost like I know and understand that that's a natural part of life. And we all have our days where we're better able to deal with difficult things in our life, and also days where we just, it really gets to us.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm so grateful for this work and the people who I've met through this work. Because all the people who I've met through this work, they were really there. And in such a deep, profound way that, and also even like my closest family, that I feel supported in it. And yes, it's like a deep rites of passage that I'm moving through, and still, there's this messy part to it of navigating any challenge in life. But there's also this liberation, because I also want to change people's mind. And also that's really also kind of in the book now as I'm reflecting on it, that we often label like these two categories in life. We have positive and we have negative experiences. Things are good or things are bad. And what I learn again and again through these experiences, it's never like that. And there's also like, and I think that's why I touch more upon the topic of death in the book. It was never something I wanted to do, but it's part of my life story. So it's almost kind of, I had to touch upon it. And part of me also wanted to, because there's such a big taboo around it. And it's also interesting because in the research process for the book, and also at the core of it, I'm also going into the Eleusinian mysteries. So I really love Greek mythology. And that's why I also went to Greece last year. And I love diving very deep into that. And then there's the story of Persephone, who is kind of abducted by Hades, kind of like the lord of the underworld. And she goes into the underworld. And then her mother goes searching for her, and it doesn't stop. And then her mother grieves for a very long time, Demeter, the goddess of the earth, and she's kind of sits at what later becomes the temple of Eleusis that is kind of built for her. So I'm not going to go into the whole story, but then eventually Persephone is kind of comes back, is saved from the underworld back to earth, and also going into Olympus, into the upper world. But she has to go back every year to the underworld because she ate a pomegranate seed. And it's a story of how the four seasons were born. And what's so beautiful about that is that every year during fall, Persephone goes back to the underworld. And then every year at spring, she comes back and she's reborn. And actually through that, she becomes the queen of the underworld and also the goddess of spring. And what I find so beautiful about the story is that, and that's how the story begins, is that there's these experiences that kind of shake the ground underneath us, almost as if we're dragged or we're kind of abducted into this deep depth. And for some people, this can also be depression or like these very difficult, dark periods in life. And some people call it also the dark night of the soul, if we go more into the perspective also of kind of Carl Jung, and he touched upon a lot on this, on the darkness, and also this saying of, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but also if your roots, it's not the exact quote, but if your roots don't go all the way down hell, they also cannot go up to the heavens. And I believe in that. I truly believe in that it's almost like when we're really able to grieve and allow ourselves to feel that and really go through that experience, it so much expands our capacity to love and to know what is important in life, and to know that there all comes a moment when we face death. And then also that's what is so interesting about that connection, right, that's been made between the Eleusinian mysteries and also kind of the research as John Hopkins, with people who face that fear through that experience and as a rites of passage. And I think that has been missing so much in our culture, these experiences where we come together for this very powerful ritual to kind of embark into the unknown and to face these fears. And then I believe when later in life then difficult things happen, or we are faced with loss, it helps us to navigate that and to not fear it, and to know that death is part of life. And that's a beautiful poetic thing to say, but to really experience that and to really accept that, it's a deep initiatory process. And anyone who has faced loss in their life knows that, right? Or who has had an experience where they're very confronted with that. So yeah, I think that's also part of my mission or purpose, as you would call it, is that to really see that relationship between death and life. And I believe that's also exactly linked to our relationship with the earth, because that's nature. It's life and it's death. And I think in modern life we can have this very romanticized version of nature, like, oh, nature's just flowers and bliss. And no, it's not. No, it's not. Nature is, yes, nature is beautiful and it's abundant, but it's also death and uncomfortableness. But that causes us to grow. And yeah, so I'm kind of
No,
touching
this is
on a
beautiful.
lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot
Sing
of
it all up, but yeah.
No, there's a lot of threads here, but I think it sums up what I'm hearing is that at the moment, the current wave of the psychedelic renaissance or the psychedelic space is mainly focusing on the medical and psychotherapeutic and, therapeutic approaches, very medicalized, and all these psychedelic-assisted therapies and, creating novel drugs from these compounds and doing different, creating different, processes for people to shift and, take away the, take away the pain, take away the overwhelm, take away the ADHD or the stress or the depression. I feel like what you have just summed up is it's many layers deep, that the medicine work isn't just a linear surface level of a medicalized process. It's actually life in itself. It's actually awakening. It's a deep evolutionary process that maybe requires a lifetime of commitment. And I know this about Eleusinian mysteries and the esoteric traditions, how they utilized psychedelic medicines. It was just that. They didn't do it so that they can get rid of this persistent, they call it, treatment-resistant depression. They were actually in it, just like being in life itself. And that's what I'm hearing. I guess it's so beautiful to see you embrace this. I also I have my own personal, insights around this, that I am fully aware that the medicalized version of the psychedelic approach is necessary because our society has, created these obstacles, the blocks and the, rules and the regulations. So I guess the medicalized approach is going to help soften up some of those pathways to bring it to public, bring it to people that actually need it, which I'm okay with and I understand it. I'm not really I don't really become this, I don't want to become an activist, like, oh, we should always, avoid sterilizing it and cleaning up in the medical rooms. But I understand that there is a necessity. We live in a society with that kind of setup and structure, so I get that. But I always believed that once I tapped into the psychedelic medicine work, I always knew that this was more than that. This was so much more deeper than anything we can ever imagine. And I already had an insight that this is a lifelong evolutionary process in consciousness. I actually posted something a few days ago that's very aligned to what you said about the good and the dualistic nature, the polarity, and then sort of standing on one side or the other. always feeling like we need to choose and then move towards positive. One of the insights that came recently to me was that the dark consciousness actually there to propel us in evolving and growing, and then the light consciousness is like here now in the present, helping us connect. So that was kind of like my distinction, the way that I distinguished both. Therefore, we always hear about these stories. If you look at a lot of people who brought so much wisdom to the world, they seem to have a very deep experience confronting their death. And you've been going through this experience at such a young age. I think that kind of propels you into far more deeper into the depths of this, I guess, needing to understand or desire to understand life and existence. And then we might have listeners that, say, well, if you look at there's millions and billions of people, not everyone's going to have that experience. Not everyone's going to have that near-death experience or have that earth-shaking experience that's going to somehow propel them into bringing something very extraordinary or bring something novel or something so eye-opening that's going to help people transition in some way or help people evolve and all that. But that also kind of dissolving, in my opinion, currently for me, because I feel like we all go through it. We may not be aware of it. Like there are some of us who consciously know what this is, and there are some of us, because death is always, it's everywhere. It's very present in everything. I think some of us have a predisposition to tune out and numb out. And then some of us somehow find a way, a pathway, a medicine or a journey or a methodology that can, help us drop into this experience of understanding it deeper. I think all that to say is, from what I'm hearing, how you summarize your journey is actually everyone's journey, whether they are aware or not. It's almost like every human, every sentient being, every human on this earth will be going through that journey, right? Whether they are aware of it or not, on different levels, but it's always the same, the pathway. And, maybe
It's
death is,
inevitable.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe death is the crossing the threshold. But then the moment we are born, each step of the way, we are getting closer and closer to that experience. Yeah, so thank you for that. I think, and also we shouldn't be afraid of having these deeper conversations. It shouldn't be a taboo. I think the more we speak about it, because this is how we're going to break the taboos, right? So yeah, there are a lot of taboos around that, especially death and loss and being human, the whole existence. So I appreciate that you are bringing this into your book. And this is so wonderful. And this will be a fundraiser, I believe, right? So we will have the link in the show notes for our listeners if they wish to support this project. Please tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I've decided that I'm gonna kind of create a partnership for it with a publishing company in the US called Flower of Life Press. And that's why I started this fundraising journey. So the way I'm going to publish it, because some of my, of course, perspectives and experience are a bit unconventional, and this way allows me to kind of keep the rights of my own work and writing. But in order to do that, I do need to raise the funds. So that's why I started a crowdfunding campaign. I think I have still a bit more than a month left. So I hope to be able to reach the goal. No, there are already a lot of people who support it, but there's still a long way to go. So we're going to see how it's going to go. Also, just a little transparency, like if I don't make or reach the goal, everyone just receives their contribution back. Just wanted to put that out there because it's a question sometimes people have. Yeah, so and then it's to cover the costs from like proofreading, editing, but also publication, and then also some marketing and promotion. So that's kind of what is covered in the cost. And I just thought, like, I'm just going to try this route and to see how that's going to go, because it would allow me to really publish it in the way I kind of really envision and would like to, but also doing it in a way where it has really beautiful quality, and that I also have professionals who can really touch upon it and make it even better experience for the reader. So yeah, and also, like, I have a lot more information on the page, so then we can just put the link there. And also, if anyone has questions, always feel free to reach out or ask. But I made sure to make it a bit more in depth, so the page itself already covers a lot of it. Yeah.
Amazing. Great stuff. Congratulations. I think this is a wonderful project. Looking forward to it. And our listeners, if you guys are interested in supporting this project, feel free. We'll have the link in the show notes so you can check it out. And I love going a bit more deeper into the psychedelic space and your observations, because you've always been very transparent. I think there's a short that you have, I think Rowan, giving a shout out to Rowan, our editor of this channel. He creates these little short videos, the little mini nuggets of wisdom from each guest, and he posts them on the channel. And I think there is one of you saying with this conviction, if you're expecting everything to be all easy, then this is not for you. I thought that was such a great validating statement, and I think that video was quite popular. So I just want to again, I always love your directness and transparency and being able to speak to your observations. So we had a episode the last episode of the channel. We had to take it down. It was one of the facilitators of many years. She was absolutely credible, being endorsed by many other, credible leaders in the psychedelic space. Somehow her and her husband got into like a misconduct in their practice. And I think she's under allegations. So we were thinking, like, maybe we could still post the episode because it was recorded a long time ago. We decided to post it anyway with a sort of like a notice or a disclaimer, just saying that we are aware that she is under allegations, and because I wasn't really sure how serious they were. And then I thought it would be a good journalism to post it with a disclaimer, just because I think I feel so responsible to, yes, there are credible people in the space with many multiple years of experiences, highly trained, but then it is also possible that things can go wrong and they lose their credibility and they make mistakes. And I know that it can cost a lot. There's a lot at stake when this happens, because you are dealing with highly fragile people with deep trauma and health challenges, mental health challenges, physical health challenges. So I understand it. I understand the implications, and I understand the seriousness of it. So I was sitting on it for a while. Should we take it down? Should we not take it down? Should we leave it? Because we also need to show our listeners that, look, this is the world we live in, right? The psychedelic space is at the moment very volatile. It's almost like wild west out there. And many people are serving medicine. Many people are, engaged in activities that are not very helpful. So by keeping the episode, I was hoping that we can even deliver this message to public, but obviously didn't go down well, so we had to take it down. And I would love to hear your observations around that, Sanne.
Yeah, of course, it's difficult for me to go into the specific case because I'm not too kind of well informed about that. What I can say about that is that what always kind of comes to me as the first insight about that is that people are very complex. So what I mean by that is that people can be very intelligent and very talented and good at something and still behave in ways that are incredibly unethical and even harmful. And I can completely understand your perspective of, okay, putting it out and then everyone kind of have their own judgments and perception. But I can also, if I kind of empathize with, when they're victims, in case that can also be incredibly painful. And I think this is also what is so difficult in journalism or any forms of media, right? Do we completely cancel someone after allegations like, or is there still this space for end? I think that's your end their allegations, and someone has also, created a lot of positive things with their work. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a position like that in the first place, right? I think another problem is, I notice this very much, and I think it can happen to a lot of people, is there is something about working with medicines with people that is so incredibly powerful. And where people on the receiving end of that can put you on this pedestal. And I've even experienced it myself, but then I'm just kind of me doing my thing on a very small scale, kind of compared to other people. So, and I still have my people who keep me very grounded and down to earth. I also kind of connect with a lot of people who are not in this space at all. So I think that kind of prevents me in some ways of kind of letting the ego run the show. Well, of course, I do want to kind of make a difference here. Like, I believe in her case, we're talking about serious allegations, right? But what I just want to point at is that there's something in the psychedelic space, and especially what is amplified in the role of a leader there, is that it is a powerful position to be in. It's an incredibly powerful position to be in, and even on a small scale. And I think that's why, more than with any other profession, it's so important that there are almost like these check-in moments where that we don't put leaders and people on these pedestals as if they're amazing and saints, because I think that's kind of part of the problem. Part of the problem, how people can get away with things, because it sounds like it's not just one allegation, right? And what I also want to touch upon, and I don't have personal experience with it, or necessarily that I'm really aware of it happening a lot in the Netherlands, but it might be. But I remember, also speaking to kind of experienced medicine people, like in Costa Rica and in Peru, that there's a lot of sexual abuse happening in medicine spaces, and this is actually quite a big problem. Like I said, I don't have personal experience with it, but these are just people I know and trust very well who've observed this and heard people come to them about this. So I think discernment is so important. And I think anyone who works in this space, I think it's so important to take responsibility and to inform people very well. And you know, I think it happens a bit more in the States because it's a different type of culture than maybe here, and also because the psychedelic scene is so different there. Um, I don't know what it is, but it's almost like certain people almost become like celebrities who do this work. Um, and I think that can easily go very unhealthy, or
Agree.
that it amplifies certain parts of someone's ego, or they become very disconnected in a strange way. Um, yeah, I think that's a difficult about a more spiritual field. It's not just with psychedelics, it's about the spiritual field in general. And I believe, there's also a more medical side to it, but still we're in the spiritual realm, working with these medicines because we do ceremonies. So that's it's spiritual nature, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
it's also very intimate. I think it's also very intimate and it's very private, and people open up. They open up to
yeah.
other people. They feel connected and they begin to feel close to them. And then I think from yeah, please finish, go ahead, because I just wanted to say something about the accountability. Like you touched on
Mhm.
something about yourself being accountable. You have these people and connections, like colleagues, maybe friends, therapists,
Yeah.
that can keep you accountable and grounded. I think that's really the key.
Yeah, and that there's not like this one leader or two, or three, but like these, and then everyone looks up to them. They're amazing. Or like this is very distorted way of relating in the first place, and it doesn't have to go wrong. There are also people who can actually handle it, but um, as we see with so many things, with so many spiritual leaders, with so many celebrities, um, everywhere, a lot of these things are now popping up, right? Where these very well respected people in their work, in their field, and then these things come out that what's happening in the background, which is really not okay, where people's boundaries have been violated. And I think it's important to say, like, okay, there's a uniqueness to this case that needs to be addressed. I cannot do that because I'm not, like I said, I'm not well informed. But it's also, I think, important for us to say this is not probably the only case where this is the case.
True, true.
And I think the first thing is stop acting like it's not happening, because that's the most painful thing for any victim, And the same thing, what we talked about, just about that there's such a big taboo around death. There's such a big taboo around this more than anything.
Yeah. Boundaries are being crossed in psychedelic spaces all the time. Not just psychedelic spaces. I think you're right. So like my take on this was we had a lovely, very experienced guest, Reverend Dr. Jessica Rochester. She is one of the first founders of the church in Canada, psychedelic church, and I asked her, actually, I said, how can we now navigate this space? Because now the psychedelics are becoming mainstream. Like even even like grandparents are heard about it. Do you know what I mean? It's like in countries where people wouldn't even know about psychedelics, they know about psychedelics now. Like people who wouldn't care about them, they read and they listen. It's on the news, it's everywhere. So it's spreading like a wildfire, especially now that there is a push for medicalization. And I asked her, how can we now make sure that we don't experience the same thing that happened in the 50s, right? The 60s, the counterculture and the that led everything to be shut down. And she said, ideally to create an accountability group of people that can keep the facilitators, the people that serve the medicine, accountable. Because sometimes, like you said, people can grow so much in this area that they become like celebrities, and if they don't have people to keep them accountable, because we don't have these, bodies and organizations to take care of this kind of situation, or examine and bring some regulation to it. So therefore, it is a wild west. People can become a celebrity in this space suddenly. Before you know it, they have all the power, right? So, and I feel like any healing space, any healing space or self-transformation, self-development space can breed this type of experiences, re-traumatization, boundaries are being crossed. I mean, look at, I don't know if you know about Jeff Brown. He has a documentary with a guru. He's a convert guru. Yeah, and is a very fascinating documentary where he put him on a pedestal, thinking he had the look, the costume, and the wisdom, and everything he was saying was highly intelligent, yet he turns out to be a pedophile. So it was an incredible show. I mean, incredible documentary about being truly informed, because I think the healing space can put the individual into a very, very fragile space that, may not be obvious in the beginning, this whole boundary crossing situation. Yeah, so I don't know, I'm kind of lost for words. It's like, I mean, one of the reasons we do these interviews and talk to facilitators and, bring so much awareness and education and information, but still, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's always going to happen. So anyway, maybe just last words from you around that. I don't want to be making this episode on that, but I felt really passionate about that this week, to bring more of this awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's best to always voice it. And I think that's kind of what my own path has opened up for me, is that around the death thing, like a lot of times I felt like I carried this darkness with me, but now I don't really see that anymore. I think it's about, I'm not afraid to bring the darkness to light. And I see that in you too. And I think that is what is most important. Like, we cannot always prevent everything from happening, right? There's a lot of things that are outside of our control, but I think to open up the conversation is important, because I think, like what I said before, the worst thing is just not talking about it, just acting like it doesn't happen. And I think that's also kind of what is for any victim is like the most painful thing.
Yeah.
And another thing I really want to say, the most famous people are not necessarily the best.
Yeah.
So I think that's another side. Like some people, they're incredibly good at the marketing promotion part, and they're skilled to that. And I respect that. It's not my best suit. So I respect people who are really good at that. Only they're not necessarily the best people to be in ceremony with. And like I said before, like people are often best to sit in ceremony with, or still very engaged in day-to-day life. Often they consciously choose not for that path. And then like we all have different paths. Like for some people it is in the cards to be on a bigger stage. But what I mean is that, like to not be kind of like lured, like I said, by the glitter and the gold. So like all the external and outside things that can all look great, but I think it can be very beneficial, to meet people, go to places through people you actually know. And yeah, and I think I do hope actually the medical space does step up a bit more around this. Not like it's like we said before, I do believe that now kind of psychotherapy and everything, it's kind of taking over psychedelics. I don't really like that part of it. I think it's way bigger than that, especially because I do a lot more, go deeper into actually the ancient history of it. Um, but the reason why I do incredibly value the medical field is because I do believe that around people that are very vulnerable, so they're suffering from depression, anxiety, severe trauma, I do believe for that specific group of people, actually the medical route is best.
Yeah.
Because those are the people that are most obsessed. How do you say it? The English word is sometimes difficult for me to pronounce. It's not my first language, but they're the most actually open to that abuse. And what we often see that people who get in these dynamics, they often face similar traumas. It doesn't always have to be the case. I don't want to generalize too much, but before in their life. So what I mean that, and that's the painful reality of the world we live in, is that the people that are being most taken
Vulnerable.
advantage of, they're already very hurt
Yeah, they're
and
very
suffering.
vulnerable, for sure. Yeah, there
And
are so many vulnerable subset of people you talk about,
yeah,
truly deeply vulnerable. And maybe, like you said, ceremonies, not really good for them. They need more specific care, I think,
yeah.
like a more trauma-informed care under.
And maybe
Yeah.
not even start with psychedelics.
Yeah, totally. Fully on board with that, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it comes
Yeah.
back down to this misconception, Sanne, right? Because, people read a blog and watch a video on YouTube, somebody who's having one-time psychedelic and their life transforming overnight.
Mhm.
And imagine if somebody listens to that and they've been suffering with treatment-resistant depression for like 20 years. Believe me, they will get on the first flight to Peru. They will, because they're acting from a desperate need to heal. Like they're so done with suffering. So that's why another interview that I wanted to have series of interviews where we touched on it in our last conversation. Actually, we talked about Michael Pollan's Netflix documentary on How to Change Your Mind, where they were showing different each individual who had a transformational experience with psychedelics. But you said it, I think you said, but that's just the highlights. No one really has seen what's under the iceberg, like what these people have actually gone through. The movie just shows the highlights. And I think these are the kind of conversations I'm passionate about. And I think we need to do a lot of series on this. I think it's so important. It's giving such wrong signals to the vulnerable group of people, for sure. And you're right, they shouldn't maybe even start with psychedelics, and maybe we should create communities in containers to hold one another, learn to be with one another with maybe a trauma-informed perspective approach initially to help build capacity, and then to because that's what the esoteric traditions practiced. There is another interview, I think, I can't remember his name at the moment. Nikos was he's a professor of the esoteric teachings and traditions, and he said in Greek, talk about Greek mythology. And he said in sort of esoteric traditions, he said there would be a mentor and mentee relationship, and then the mentor would prepare for their psychedelic experience, and it will take many months before they're even allowed to drink something. It's a bit like that. I think, yeah, there's so much to be said about that. But it's just, yeah, again, opening up these conversations so that would be, so we can break down the taboos, I guess. So that's the mission, as always. But yeah, so thank you so much, Sanne. I know we're coming to the end of our conversation. I always enjoy your transparent, direct observations that you speak to. Before we let you go, what would you like to say? What would you like to relay as a message? something that you want to leave our listeners with this time round?
Yeah, what I really feel like, and I feel like that's the essence of the book as well, and that's why I chose the title "Become the Medicine," is that to really become aware that the medicine is within you, and working kind of with different medicines just amplifies that process. And I believe it's so important to really come back to our own process. We live in a world where there's so much information. We're kind of opened up to so many of other people's perspectives, and there's a beautiful side of that, right? That's why you have a podcast and we share all these things. It's very beautiful, but I think it's so important to come back to ourselves and to come back to our own life and what you need in a moment. And that there's no rush, especially when it comes to working with psychedelics. Like, there's no rush. And I understand when someone is suffering, and I've connected with a lot of people who are. So if you're suffering, you're not alone in that. I understand that when you're in a place of suffering, you just want something that makes it stop or that changes it. But to understand that, yes, we can have these breakthrough moments, and that's real and it really happens. But actually, a life that is truly fulfilling and sustainable, we create that every day, right? And I think it's always coming back to that. And then for some of us, yeah, okay, psychedelics will be a part of that. But also know that even if you're very interested, and it's also okay to say, like, maybe not now, but there will come a day when I'm ready, and to really give yourself that space and that time that you need, and to really connect with yourself. And I think, and that's what I'm now becoming aware of, and I'm not always really good at it. I'm good at it giving it to other people, but I can also kind of struggle with it myself, to really be loving and kind to myself. And I think for a lot of us, it's so easy to give that to others. But I think an essential part of healing is to really give that to ourselves. And then anything we do will be infused with that. But yeah, like to be more kind to yourself. I think that's very important. I think we can be so harsh on ourselves, especially when we're having a difficult time. And that's when we kind of need it the most. So I hope that, that we can find different ways, which is a longer process, to build, more communities, more support networks. And we're all doing that step by step to kind of also create up more in the fabric of day-to-day life, that people don't have to suffer on their own anymore. Because I don't believe psychedelics on their own are going to solve that. And that's a kind of the bigger, communal and relationship structure. And that's something we're creating together. And we're learning, and, it's, yeah,
And
I think
that's
I'll
the
just leave it at that.
and that's the best message to leave our listeners with. Thank you so much. So genuine, so coming from the heart, and so much truth in it. Psychedelics don't do the work. I know, like, intellectually, we know this. I think our listeners probably heard me say so many times, and heard our guests say it so many times. But there is this deep desire of our young part, you could call it inner child, that really wants it now, like now, overnight, immediately, to be here. But yes, it's about building capacity, being kind, taking time. Thank you so much, Sanne. It's always a pleasure having you. All the best with the book project, and I'm sure we'll be connecting very soon to follow up one more time. We love having you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm very grateful to be here. And it always sparks a beautiful conversation. And yeah, I love to talk about these things with you, and I always feel very open to just share it as it is without having to, think too much about how I'm going to say something. So that's what I really like about the way you kind of facilitate the podcast. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed this session with Sanne, and please tune in. So, share your comments, and also feel free to feedback around the keeping the space and the psychedelic space informed, safe, and then all the amazing things on the harm reduction area. Feel free to share your feedback, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.